do when these things here clash with the existing way of governing? Let's suppose in an existing way of governing, businesses make decisions. Or in an existing way of praying, it's not the Mass that people have, but instead, I don't know, prayer gatherings, praise and worship sessions. And what if the way of communication is actually more in terms of respect for privacy? Instead of talking about enculturation, in other words, from the point of view of the natives in Guinea, which is kind of what you expect, I just described your challenge. Welcome to Protestant America. How do I bring Catholicism to Protestant America? Not at all an easy task. Especially the stronger these two become. If you've got a real Protestant America, like let's suppose it's small town Ohio, for instance. Right? And then you put a real strong Catholic culture, like, I don't know, let's just suppose a Mexican family. Well, the two could be like oil and water. In a Mexican family, I remember saying, the Native Americans, for example, we visited the reservation. And then before we landed there, they gave us a talk to prepare us, and they said, you'll see that the yards are overgrown. The grass is long, and it looks really junky. They do that on purpose because they don't mow their lawns. So it's like a thing of like, let the grass be the grass. So it's actually not junky, it's them being natural. And for our eye, it looked like a rundown thing, but to their eye, it looked quite normal. So if you had a Native American Catholic family, or a Mexican Catholic family, well, they have parties. And their parties go, I mean, when I was in Laredo, every Friday night was barbecue. Everyone was barbecuing in their backyard. It was crazy. You could smell the Kingsford charcoal. I mean, the whole neighborhood just smelled like barbecue. Because that's what everybody did. And that was considered to be okay. Dogs everywhere. It was so weird the other day. I was walking and I realized, I was in New Jersey, the inner city of New Jersey, didn't see a single dog. Not a one, no dogs. In Laredo, they picked up something like 6,000 stray dogs in 3 months. So, like, that's considered fine in certain places. And then in Protestant America, you could, respect for privacy, for example. I remember in Amsterdam, there are no blinds on the front windows. You can see right into everyone's house. It's considered rude to put up blinds. And someone explained, well, that's because it was a Calvinist city where I was. And for the Calvinists, that you be seen as being proper and decorous at all times is a sign of that you're grace, have grace. So they actually wanted to kind of show off that they weren't doing anything wrong. So anybody at any time could look into their house. These are like things, the stronger that it becomes, the more that it seems impossible. And there's strife between the two. How do I take a really Catholic world and bring it to a non-Catholic world? On the plane flying in here, I was forced to endure a long diatribe of error and craziness from a woman who was talking about gender issues and gender identity. 2 seats behind me, a very loud voice, and all about, she was a professor of, I guess, LGBT LGBTQ studies. So I was listening to one of her lectures. She was explaining to the woman next to her about everything in the world. And so how would I possibly interface with her? There's a way. I wanted to show you the difficulty because everywhere you guys go, you're going to be bringing a set of assumptions that come from your Catholic culture. And you have to bring and make that culture present in a new culture. There's three ways to do that. On the one hand, you dominate. So an example of that would be the places where the Spanish, and they didn't do it everywhere, but wherever the Spanish basically eradicated the Indian faith and just brought little Spain, you had the domination. On the other hand, you blend. So in a blend, you've got it's neither really Catholic nor really Protestant. And then the third way, you I would say impregnate, but you got to be careful here. You imbue. And it's this third way that actually is the way that the church proposes. The problem with imbuing is that it requires an immense amount of intelligence. Intelligence that we call analogical. In an analogy, I could see an analogy would be, I would say, as a tower is strong, so Regina is determined. As a tower is strong, so Regina is determined. So that I could say Regina is a tower. And I would mean it not as like a reference, a metaphor, that would be like a symbol, but it has an analogy, meaning there's a tower in her. The Native Americans had a huge sense of analogy when they called themselves Sleeping Bear, or he is, running the grass. And they would name places based upon an action, and inanimate things were animate because they could feel their spirit, not just in some weird spiritual way, but with intelligence. Because that's exactly when I see the stars. I'm not just seeing a star. I'm seeing peace. Analogies is the high point of the intellect. And our culture today in America diminishes its value. But it's the highest form of intelligence. When you meet someone who's analogical, they're wonderful to talk to. They're able to jump from one thing to the next and actually understand the proportion between things. They're able to use 3 or 4 meanings to the same word. They're able to speak to you at one level while meaning another altogether. And they're just mastering the conversation. The more analogical the mind, the more masterful it is. Which also means usually the less it's understood. Alas. So the way you construct an analogy looks like this. A mother is to her son what a father is to... No, it's not. Mother is not the son. Father's not the daughter. You're an idiot. I hate when people do this. They don't get it. It's not my fault that you're not smart. If you were, you would get this. You would say the moon is to, whatever I go out, is to a tree. What Because there has to be a real relationship. That's the difference between making stuff up. There has to be what my mind has to be able to grasp the real relationship between two things, and then say that that relationship is also between those two things. So one thing you could say is that the moon is to the tree what the light bulb is to my desk. Yeah. Because in the night, it illuminates. Even better would be what the mirror in my room, right? Then you have a more or less perfect analogy. But what your mind is grasping on is, it has to be real. That's what the difference is. A metaphor isn't always real. You know, an analogy is real. I'm seeing this real relationship. Okay, that's one form of analogy. I don't want to keep going on and on, but when I look at a 21st century Generation Z person, and I say, what do they look like as a saint? I have to be ready to change some things. There's no toga. There's no, how do I make a 14-year-old be holy like St. Thomas Aquinas was holy? Jesus was to St. Thomas Aquinas as Jesus is to this person. Is an analogy, but it's totally different. So I see there's two things here. There's a real relationship, and there's a complete difference. The real relationship is called the ratio, and the complete difference is called the modus. The ratio is the same. Brie is to St. John Institute what Regina is to St. John Institute. The analogy is that both of them are missionary entrepreneurs. But they're in completely different ways. Brie will be a missionary entrepreneur in her way, and Regina will be a missionary entrepreneur in her way. And yet they have something in common, SJI formation. But my way of having that formation is so different from your way of having. Your mode of formation is different than my mode of formation, but it's the same formation. So right now I'm enculturating by taking this formation and giving it to you and saying, have it differently. Therefore, the same Catholic faith will exist in Canada differently than it will exist in Mexico. But it's the same faith. I have to be able to get the ratio to be the same and the modus to be different. And that just takes intelligence. Because there's intelligence to be able to be like, no, the 14-year-olds, here's an example. To go on a retreat 100 years ago, you would have sat in a room and had silent talks given to you. Today, you go to a rock and roll dance with girls on your first night of the retreat at age 14. Lack of intelligence. The analogy does not hold. But that's what they do. I know because I went on when I was in high school. It was crazy. The Diocesan Youth Retreat, Search or whatever it was. Saturday night, the Saturday of the retreat was a dance that played slow songs at the dance. What are they thinking? I was 14, 15. We're sitting there dancing with girls. Oh yeah, I know this is just a celebration. This is great. Like, we're all putting cologne on before we're going down to the dance. You know what I mean? So that we impress the girls. They're all getting perfume on. Like, so like that's a dumb analogy because they're modern. Well, no. But is there a way to get a 14-year-old kid to at the same time experience a silent retreat? It probably still looks different. Back then. Make sense? Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why it doesn't happen is because of that lack of intelligence. People either they'll say, I gotta dominate. Y'all are just wearing skirts and that's it. Because that's what women should wear. Right? Or they'll blend, and they'll be like, wow, you know, whatever. But to imbue. Imbue is what you do when you fill a room with a fragrance. You changed everything while changing nothing. Okay? All right. Let's take a look then at what the church teaches us about it. Because the church is a master of this.
Don't worry about it.
They're bad anyway, right?
Yeah.
Major sin. So I wanted to look at this document because this is just one of those awesome things. I never want you to feel like you're imposing your faith on somebody. Because that's what everyone will walk around doing. They say, don't be Catholic because then you can't impose. That lady on the plane, she imposed everyone around her, her stupid opinions. And if I were to sit there and talk about the real presence of the Blessed Mother and marriage between one man and one woman, I would impose all my opinions. Who was respectful on that plane? I was.
It's like, what's her name was talking about when she was teaching. She had to sign a contract that said she wouldn't, like, share her beliefs with anybody unless she was asked directly.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
What do you believe?
Sandy.
Yeah. And I was like, well, isn't that the same thing as, like, teaching? Like, you believe that this is true because you're teaching it. Like, isn't that imposing your beliefs on these students? Like, just because it's not religious overtly doesn't mean it's not. It's just so frustrating.
It's a double standard, isn't
Yeah.
there? Yep. So this document came out in 1888. So it's a little bit old, but like a lot of the best documents came out under John Paul II. So this was just a time where there was just a lot of really cool, because the Pontificate of John Paul II, so you had kind of like Catholicism doing a certain thing, and then the whole world changed in the 60s. And then the Pope that started Vatican II died in 1975, 10 years later. John Paul II took over. And so if you looked at it from the point of view of timing, the reason why a lot of the documents we look at are from that era is because he was taking Vatican II and implementing it in a way that no pope had done and no pope ever will do, because now we're just rocking and rolling. But his job was to actually do what Vatican II said. So Vatican II, give me the dates. Nice job, 1962, 1964, perfect.
66.
And the first 10 years were under the reign of Pope Paul VI. So what did he do to implement Vatican II? Well, Vatican II said is, we need to do this, and this. And so he did. But to do those things from 1964 until 1972, all he was doing was internal work of documents. So he was drafting what's called the post-conciliar documents. You have the documents of the council, and then the post-conciliar documents. And this is where, for example, the Mass was all butchered up, and it was by politics. There's a guy, you know, who was named Munini, and he was doing all kinds of shenanigans. And the Pope was signing these away. There's a story, for example, Pope Paul VI, we used to have an octave of Pentecost. So there's the 8 days of celebrating Pentecost, like you had Easter. And so he shows up on the Monday after Pentecost, and it's the first Monday of Ordinary Time. There's green vestments. And he said, what are these green vestments? It's the octave of Pentecost. And they said, Holy Father, like, no, it's no longer the octave of Pentecost now in Ordinary Time. And Paul said, who did this? And he said, you did, Holy Father. And he said, true story.
When did he do that?
That would have been 1969.
He got rid of the octave and didn't even realize it?
Or he realized it, but he didn't really realize what it meant. Right? Because all of a sudden, there was no more octave of Pentecost. He, with one stroke of the pen, undid like 1,000 years of Catholic tradition. We've always had an octave of Pentecost.
Why?
That's the whole drama of the liturgy. That's why you have the guys a block from here and people that go to that church, because they were like, because they were like, this is all wrong. Monsignor Lefebvre, the guy's name was Bonini, and no one quite knows the story. You could, if you want to get the conspiracy theories, Bonini. He was this priest that basically was in charge of liturgical reforms, and he would just go in and the Pope would sign documents, and he'd sign them. So it was his fault, but he trusted him. And behind him, there's all kinds of just like politics. So the Mass that we have now has never existed before. The Mass that existed until 1962 was in organic growth, meaning like it changed, but it changed like over time, and whole areas of the church that then would adopt things. So like slowly, and then it was understood and had meaning in years of tradition. And literally overnight, the church invented this new thing. The Mass we have now is just a pure invention. They just invented it. So like Eucharistic prayer number 3, and they just wrote it. The story is actually that the bishops were trying to get it done in terms of deadlines, so they're actually at a house all together, sitting in a room, writing Eucharistic prayer number 3. They're just making it up. That's why people left the church. It was hugely scandalous. That's why people still leave the church.
Why is it, I mean, this is a long time ago for people to still be like, not over it.
Well, yeah, that's right. The fact is, though, that, put that aside, because that's the liturgical question, liturgical reform, there are a lot of reforms. Like, take all the nuns who left the Catholic Church, it was in those 10 years. There was something like 30,000 American sisters that left the nunnery in 10 years. Shows you, I mean, like, then you had the priests marrying the nuns, and you had the priests marrying other priests, and then you had all this, and everything was allowed. This is where the clown masses come out, right? You have masses celebrated by clowns. All the just type of nonsense, including the pedophilia stuff, it all just burst out during this area because there was a rupture with tradition. And what Paul VI was doing was he was issuing the documents of how to implement the council. So by the time 1972 came and he finally finished implementing the council with all his documents, and I just show you the negative. I mean, there's a lot of positive things too. The laws, for example, it was up to Paul VI to make the law that a Protestant could marry a Catholic. Before 1962, a Catholic couldn't set foot in a Protestant church without being excommunicated. If you went to the Protestant church without permission, you committed a mortal sin. You know what I mean? So like a marriage between a Catholic and a Protestant, you were excommunicated. But that's all changed. Other laws, like they had the index of forbidden books. So there was a list, and your book was put on that if it was a mortal sin to read a book that was on the index without the bishop's permission. So they had this list of like the bad books. Well, those were all things that were gotten rid of and changed, but it all had to be done legally, and it absorbed the pontificate of Pope Paul VI. He spent all of his time doing that until 1972. So he had like really 3 years. By then he was old. He died in 1975. No, he died in 1977. 1977. So he had 5 years of being Pope. After that, you've got 26 years of JP2. 26 years. And so during that time, he was like, I have to now not only implement things legally, but I have to give the theological reform of Vatican II. Because what Vatican II said wasn't just that, whatever, nuns shouldn't wear the habit anymore, or whatever. What Vatican II said was, we need to rethink how we approach the world. And that rethinking was done concretely in Pontificate of John Paul II, who died, give me the year? 2005, right? Nice job. Isn't that amazing? So that whole era, 2005 is not that long ago. But that's what shows you, that's all. So all these documents, like this one, are really awesome because they're all coming out, and John Paul II is like, we're going to put Vatican II into practice theologically and pastorally. So we need to, so that's why his pontificate was just so important.
He was in his prime, JP2. He was only Pope for 12 years. And he was doing a lot of things about the missionary mandates. 1988 was the year of mission. And what this thing is, the International Theological Commission is this group of like select theologians. It's kind of like if you're part of that, like you're set for life. It's like these are the all-stars, you know. And they get together and tackle difficult questions to provide kind of like a theological basis for the church to teach. So what they teach is not church teaching. Well, it was church teaching up until 1917. And then they changed it. But it is church. It wasn't church. Not church teaching, but it is like it's at the service of the church's teaching. So like everyone pays attention to what they write because they kind of like go to the depth of all the questions and resolve a lot of the hard points, so that then the Pope can come in and just be like, okay, we thought this through. What did the ITC say? Yeah, that sounds right. And he goes. So they put this really tough question about acculturation down so that they could tackle it. I gave you just 4 pages of a document that's probably 10 to 12 pages, and a lot of the more like descriptive aspects of it, where the problems are, you know, etc. I cut out because I wanted you to get to the heart of it. Okay?
Yep.
All right. Nature, culture, and grace. What one of you like to read?
Anthropologists readily return to describe or define culture in terms of its distinction, sometimes even opposition between nature and culture. The significance of this word, nature, varies, moreover, with the different conceptions of the natural sciences, of philosophy, and of theology. The magisterium understands this word in a very specific sense. The nature of a being is what constitutes it as such, with the dynamism of its tendencies towards its proper sins.
Proper ends is what it should be.
It is from God that natures possess what they are, as well as their proper ends. They are from that moment impregnated with a significance in which man, as the image of God, is capable of discerning the creating hand of God.
Okay, so what it's going to start doing here is defining these terms. Give me the definition of nature.
Nature of a being is what constitutes it as such, with the dynamism of its tendencies towards its proper end.
Come on in, bro.
Did you serious?
Yes. Power. Sorry. Okay. Nature, say that again, please.
Nature of a being is what constitutes it as such, with the dynamism of its tendencies towards its proper ends.
So it's what constitutes something. By that, it's what makes a thing what it is. Okay? And this includes its dynamism towards its fulfillment. So what is the nature of a marker?
Plastic.
This is an example. Good. Nature of a marker, markerness. Got it? Okay, so is trying to say what's the difference between nature and culture and grace. And it's going to define these terms for us. It says culture, first of all, is defined as not nature. Fulfillment. Anthropologists readily return to describe culture in terms of the distinction between nature and culture. So what is culture? Well, that's not what's natural. Okay, go ahead.
The fundamental inclinations of human nature, expressed by natural law, appear therefore as an expression of the will of the Creator. This natural law declares the specific requirements of human nature, requirements which are significant of the design of God for his rational and free creature. Thus, all that misunderstanding is avoided which, perceiving nature in a
Univocal.
sense, would reduce a man to material nature.
Mhm.
You want me to read it?
No, I want to ponder that. The fundamental inclinations of human nature appear as an expression of the will of the Creator. This natural law declares the specific requirements of human nature. Requirements, thus all that misunderstanding avoiding.
Okay, so when we speak about this from the Christian sense, what constitutes man, so human nature, man is more than a body, but is a product of God. And we see this by what they call natural law. And you can refer to it as laws of the heart. That two people would try to love each other, and that every human being is inclined towards such love, shows that our nature is more than just our body. There's a thing of God that's within it. That we try to respect justice naturally. That we naturally have a sense of fairness. That we naturally love what is beautiful. That we naturally seek what is free. Where does that come from? So what's in our very nature, we have a trace that we come from God. This is the second point. Third point.
It is appropriate at the same time to consider human nature according to its unfolding in historical time. That is, to observe what man, endowed with a fallible liberty and often subjected to his passions, has made of his humanity. This heritage transmitted to new generations includes simultaneously immense treasures of wisdom, art, and generosity, and a considerable share of deviations and perversions. Attention, therefore, as a whole, revolves around human nature and the human condition, an expression which integrates existential elements of which certain ones, sin and grace, affect the history of salvation. If, therefore, we use the word culture in a primarily positive sense, as a synonym of development, for example, as have Vatican II and the recent popes, we will not forget what cultures can perpetuate and favor the choice of pride and selfishness.
Okay. So when you have human nature, you also have to recognize that that human nature, this is kind of cool, it's giving a really good understanding of culture. Human nature includes what man has done with his humanity. So here it started to answer what the question of culture is. Culture is the product of human choices. Both good ones and bad ones. Attention, not the word, but attention, therefore, as a whole, revolves around human nature, human condition, and expression, which integrates existential elements, of which certain ones affect the history of salvation. So yeah. So this is the product of human choices is the first point about culture. Section, paragraph 4.
Culture consists in the extension of the requirements of human nature as the accomplishment of its end, as is especially taught in the Constitution. Gaudium et Spes. Man comes to a true and full humanity only through culture, that is, through the cultivation of the goods and values of nature. The word culture, in its general sense, indicates everything whereby man develops and perfects his many bodily and spiritual qualities. Thus, the domain of culture is multiple. He strives by his knowledge and his labor to bring the world itself under his control. He renders social life more human, both in the family and the civic community, through improvement of customs and institutions. Throughout the course of time, he expresses, communicates, and conserves in his works great spiritual experiences and desires, that they may be of advantage to the progress of many, even of the whole human family.
So that's an amazing way to appreciate that. People say, what is culture? So let's look at the culture of SJI. You've got what gives us our culture? If you had to create a culture at SJI, what would you do to do that?
Like create a culture within the culture of SJI?
No, create the culture of SJI.
Could be.
What we're doing?
Yeah.
What is that?
I mean, by like
Well,
everything's
you
like
set a
working to
standard.
reach a specific goal. So like we have this schedule, and then it's like broken up so that you have like these specified times for prayer and study, and it's all built around community. So I mean, I would say community is the biggest way to try to create the culture.
Yeah, so you look at the expectations for the goals of what you want to accomplish, and then you structure it accordingly. So,
And how is it that community creates culture?
what else creates culture?
How does community create culture? Like, what do you do in community?
Well, I think it's because of the way we live in. I mean,
What do you do?
like if we were just out hanging out with Ganja Greg as a community, like that would be different than like living together and eating together and praying together and studying together.
And setting the table beforehand.
Yeah,
And doing the dishes afterwards.
yeah. So that's your standards that are there.
So if you take human life and accentuate certain parts of it, you're going to give that human life a certain kind of twist. Give an example. I was talking at Walsh yesterday to the group going on a pilgrimage, and I said, no earphones. You can bring them. There might be times when you can use them, but in general, I don't want you having earphones. Why? Because that's not the culture we're going to be all about. So there, I took a practical thing. I said, okay, human nature can develop in many ways. I wanted to develop in terms of dialogue and conversation. So I'm going to say, no earphones. If I wanted to develop it along the way of everyone gets to do what they want to do, then I would say, please bring your earphones.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cool...
So there's a.
You can't take your earphones.
No, say it.
Well, I was just gonna say, with creating a culture, you have to have communication and whatever, conversation and blah blah blah.
Yes, if you want that, a certain type of culture, a very human culture. You will always be in a culture. That's one of the fallacies about, like, I'm in the bubble or I'm in the world. The world is nothing but bubbles. Everyone is in a bubble. You're either in the hard-working white guy bubble, in which case you drive a or a
Ford
right,
F-150.
pickup truck or a beat-up truck. But it'd be really weird to have a classical musician listening to Bon Jovi. Just it'd be really weird to have a plumber listening to classical music. It can happen. But like you see how like everyone's in their little bubble. You realize that if you're doing hard work, you should be listening to classic rock. Why? It's so stupid. Why aren't we listening to the books on tape? But because that's not what we do. So, okay, So it's just neat because everyone, the rest of your life, people are going to be talking about culture. Culture consists in the extension of the requirements of human nature. This is so cool. So the requirements, if I'm going to build a culture at SJI, I'm going to start with the human nature. Things like dress. Oh, let's do a dress code. Yes. Sleep. Cool, we'll do a schedule. Speaking. We're going to have a no swearing policy. Things like strangers, we're going to welcome them. And so forth and so on. And now you can try to understand, you start with what's human nature, dating. And then you modify it here, you extend it. Everything that's going to be there, and then you do it in your way. So when I'm talking about culture, I'm not talking about human nature. I'm talking about the way nature is lived out. You remember very well when I went to work with the gypsies in Memphis. Unbelievable experience. The women's hair, it was literally the beehives of the 1960s. And they were all wearing them. You can spot one of the women just by the way they wear their hair. So strange that when they came into the church, they all sat together in the same section of the church, in the back, like the rejects. Because people don't associate with them. They're of a different culture. And not only do they wear their hair differently, but they get married when they're 16, they get married when they're 12, they get married when they're 14, and then the marriage isn't necessarily consummated at that age, and you could get married with a really old guy, but you want a baby for sure, so a lot of them are getting in vitro fertilization, because if they can't have a baby, it's bad in their culture. So there's a big pressure to do in vitro, and you have a whole different thing, so that someone from that culture needs to evangelize them, because otherwise they see everyone as an outsider. I experienced that. It wasn't human nature; it was the way human nature was extended. So the realm of culture is in the how I do things, not what I do. See? Pretty smart stuff. 5.
The primary constituent of culture is the human person, considered in all aspects of his being. Man betters himself. This is the first end of all culture. But he does so thanks to the works of culture and thanks to a cultural memory. Culture also still designates the milieu in which and on account of which persons may grow.
Okay, so then he says over here, this how is not something small. This how is the milieu for my growth. So that means you have to be very, very attentive to it, because if I don't do culture right, for example, when a student left, a priest comes and sits and studies with you. Why? Not just because he likes you. It's because he knows that we have to maintain this milieu of community, or else they won't grow. Okay. So like the milieu of the cleanliness of the space, the milieu of the calm. We close the doors. Don't bother the students. Why? Because you need a culture of whatever. So that's exactly what you think about a culture. Even like when you grow a culture, you take a swab of your thing and you make a culture out of it. It means it's this milieu, this place where it grows. So the culture is what has grown when you put it in when she's in a stable, structured, spiritual place, it's going to be the best Regina. What grows inside of Regina when she's a spiritual structure, the best Regina. It's the milieu. You oftentimes hear this, the cultural milieu. Do you know what I'm talking about, milieu? You don't know the word. It's a French word, we use it in English. And it means just that, the environment, the growing environment. This is a milieu. And this is an other milieu. Different light,